Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Derek. Today we're going to be looking at a lab uh, where we work with elastic load balancers. So, to give you just kind of a high level overview of what that would look like, because I'm a visual person and I'm sure a lot of you are too. If you had, for example, say you had an end user right here, okay, and they want to make a request to your web application, and let's say this kind of tier of instances, this is 4 instances right here. Say this is, your web application layer where you actually host your application servers on EC2 instances. And then you have, more, 3 more instances back here that, would be like, for example, your logic processing layer. And then, of course, you have your private instances back here that are your databases. But what we're going to mostly be focusing on today are these right here. So this is a load balancer and this is a load balancer. Now the difference between the two, so there's 3 load balancers, I should say, but the two kind of most common ones are going to be application and network load balancers. So an application load balancer, as the name kind of suggests, it balances traffic from end users to your application layer. Okay, and it supports HTTP and HTTPS traffic, whereas a network load balancer is generally going to be used inside of your AWS network, and it's used to again distribute requests to target groups in your network. It's designed. It uses TCP UDP traffic, and it's designed to handle millions of requests with sub-millisecond latency. So if you ever get a question on the test asking about a load balancer that needs sub-millisecond latency and can handle millions of requests, start thinking network load balancer. Okay. So this is basically what we're going to do, right? We're going to set up a load balancer, and then we're going to have a target group here. We're just for the simplicity for this lab, we're just going to use one target group. And that target group is going to contain 2 EC2 instances. And these would theoretically be, what's hosting, again, our web application. If you wanted to take a step further, what you could do is you could set up a network load balancer to, again, balance traffic from your instances out to maybe some other instances that are handling again maybe some kind of application logic, right? But you know we're just going to look at kind of the basic setup of an ELB to an application layer, and then if you want, you can expand on it from there. All right. So as always, don't forget to delete your resources when you're done, so you're not paying for stuff you don't need. So we're going to sign into the AWS console here, and we're going to go to EC2. And then once that opens up, okay, AWS, what's going on here? It's not interesting. Well, I still got internet. Okay, that was weird. Whatever. So now if we come over here to this load balancing section on the left-hand side in the EC2 console, we can click on load balancers. So remember, with a load balancer, what you're going to need are 3 key things. Okay, you're going to need target groups, which contain targets. You're going to need listeners, and then you're going to need rules. And we're going to kind of walk through all 3 of those just so you can, again, get a better idea of how to set them up and what they're actually used for. So it says I don't have any load balancers in US East 1, and as you might have guessed, it is region specific. So I'm going to go ahead and create a load balancer here. And this just kind of tells us, what our options are for load balancers. You do have a classic load balancer, but it's going to be deprecated pretty soon because it only kind of hosts legacy EC2 instances. So I wouldn't worry too much about this one, to be honest with you. But application load balancer, that's the one we're going to be looking at. Again, it hosts HTTP, HTTPS traffic. And it's at the application layer, so it'll be layer 7. And then the network load balancer supports TCP UDP. And then it operates at the network layer, so layer 4. And like I mentioned earlier, it can handle millions of requests per second with ultra low latency. So those are keywords that AWS likes to throw at you on the test, when they're referencing the network load balancer. So definitely keep those in mind. And then a gateway load balancer is more for specific use cases, but if you needed to like deploy and manage third-party virtual appliances, then you would use a gateway load balancer, but I don't have any of those, so I'm not going to use that. But we can just go ahead and set up an application load balancer. So we'll hit create. And we'll give it a name here. We'll just say, or we'll just call it a lab ALB application load balancer. And if it's being used for an application, right, a web application, then it's going to be internet facing. So we'll leave that selected there. We'll just leave the default IP address type at IPv4. We're going to leave quite a few things that are defaults. Network mapping, we're going to select this is where if you had like multiple VPCs that, supported, the type of load balancer you're setting up, then you could select those here. So I'm just going to leave this as it is here. Mappings, if you wanted to specify like a particular availability zone, then you could do that here. It wants us to do 2 though, so I'm just going to go ahead and select the first 2 because, this won't be around very long. And this is basically saying that this subnet that we selected doesn't have a route to an internet gateway. And if you kind of remember, an internet gateway is basically, like the name implies, a gateway to the internet from your AWS account and resources. So if you want to have a application load balancer that is internet facing, you will need a internet gateway. Okay, so let's go ahead and take note of that. And security groups. I mean, if you wanted to specify like security groups, you could do that here. I'll just select one that I already have made. All right, so listeners and routing. So listeners are basically, it's a process that checks for specific requests that use the specified port and protocol that you configure. So, for example, if you're doing an application load balancer, obviously you would want HTTP traffic with its default port of 80. And then once it does that, once it receives that sort of request, whether you want to then say, okay, where do I actually want to send this to? And that's where target groups come in. So I don't have any target groups right now, but let's go ahead and fix that. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a target group. So we're gonna open this up, and so it just kind of automatically launches the configuration wizard for a target group for us. So I do already have 2 instances set up, so we're just going to leave target type as instance. But of course, you could also use like Lambda functions, IP addresses, another load balancer if you want. Target group name, let's just call this lab TG, lab target group. Again, it uses HTTP over port 80. And it needs to be in the same VPC that you want your load balancer to be in. However, I want to make sure that these instances I have running are in the right VPC. Otherwise, they won't show up when we go to select targets. So let's go ahead and hit instance state running. I set these EC2 instances up. It's pretty easy. We got a lab for that, but just make sure they're in the free tier. But if I go ahead and click on this here, because they're in the same VPC, we can see that the VPC ID is right here. So I want to see if this is default or if it's my VPC, which is labeled or named rather my VPC 1. So let's see which VPC this one actually is, because sometimes it's hard to tell from the VPC ID. All right, so we have this one here that our instances are using, and it is the default VPC. It's not my VPC, so we'll go ahead and just use the default VPC here. And we'll leave this up in case we need to come back and look at our instances. So VPC, so this is the default, and then like I mentioned, I have either VPC here. But if you look too, each VPC has its own unique identifier. So you can see this one starts with 0BFB. And then if I come back here and select this, You can see here, it's the same VPC, and then we'll just do the same thing here. So same VPC. So we want to make sure we set up these instances which are in this VPC in this target group, and this target group is also in that VPC. Otherwise, it's going to get confused. All right, so now if you wanted to specify like a different type of HTTP, you could do that. We don't necessarily need to do that. Health checks. So health checks is a feature of Elastic Load Balancer where it's going to periodically send requests like you specify to make sure that the targets in your target group respond, as expected. And if they don't, it marks them unhealthy and stops sending traffic there. It's important to note that ELB isn't going to set up, new instances for you or terminate ones that are unhealthy. It's just not going to send traffic there. You need something like auto scaling or some other kind of, service to manage your instances if they do become unhealthy. But so since we're looking or listening rather for HTTP traffic, it makes sense that our health checks are also HTTP traffic. So if you had like maybe you had like slash like index or slash root or slash something like a default path other than just slash, then you can specify that there. But that's fine for me. And then again, this is just kind of some extra things you can specify in regards to your health checks. So basically, what this is saying is that this healthy threshold is the number of consecutive health checks successes required before considering an unhealthy target healthy. So if you have a target go down and you re-register that target as a new instance that's healthy, in your target group, it's going to ping it or check its health rather 5 times before it considers it healthy and starts sending traffic there. And this is kind of the same thing, but with unhealthy. So if it gets 2 failed requests in a row, then it's going to mark it unhealthy and stop sending traffic to that target. And this is going to say how long it's going to wait for a response after it sends out that health check request before it considers it, a failure. So if it doesn't respond in 5 seconds, then it's going to consider this instance unhealthy. And the interval is basically the amount of time between health checks of an individual target. So every 30 seconds, and you can kind of see below all these here the acceptable ranges. But every 30 seconds, my load balancer is going to send out a health check to each instance to make sure that it is healthy. And if it's not, then it's just going to stop sending traffic there. And then this is just the success code that it looks for. We'll just leave it as the default. And then if you wanted to add tags, you could do that. Again, in a production environment, would definitely recommend that. But for this lab, we don't really need to do that. So let's go ahead and click next. All right, so now we need to register targets. And because we're all on the same VPC here, we're just going to select both of these targets. Okay. And then we're just going to say, port 80 on those targets. That's fine. And we're going to go ahead and click include as pending below, which kind of just moves into like a staging area where you can review and say, yes, I actually want to, add these as targets to this target group that we're creating, which I do. So we're just going to go ahead and leave those there, and then we will say create target group. All right, so it looks like it created immediately. So it should load it up here. And while this is finishing up, let's just go back and see what we have so far. So far what we have is we have a target group. So yeah, it doesn't look very good. So target group, imagine these two instances right here are the instances that we referenced earlier. So they're in, this kind of cluster of 2, right? This is a target group. And as you can see here, this Elastic Load Balancer, since this is the only target group, when it gets a request, it's going to take it over to this target group, and it's going to decide which instance to send that request to, rather, based on how you can specify you want your traffic routed between the two instances. Okay, so that's what we have so far. So let's go ahead and refresh this, and then just get rid of that. And if we go ahead and select this, we can see our target group details here rather. This is kind of a nice dashboard to really just kind of see what's going on from a high level overview. So you can see we have two targets, and we haven't really done any health checks yet because we just kind of made this. So it says everything's zeros for healthy and unhealthy. But if we come back here, we can see that it has those two instances registered as targets. So ELB instance 1 and 2. And they're currently being unused because they are not configured yet to receive traffic from the load balancer. Okay. So now, basically, what we have is a target group, but we still need to go finish up our load balancer. Okay. So I'm just going to come back into this tab. And now, if we hit the refresh button here, it should populate with our target group. There it is, LabTG. So I'll go ahead and select that. And then as you can see, it just kind of tells you what the target type is and what it's listening for, HTTP. And then if you wanted to maybe add another listener and do like, HTTPS, you could do that. But we don't really need to do that, so that's fine. So if you wanted to enable a global accelerator, you could do that. We definitely don't need that. And then of course, if you wanted tags, you could add those as well. So again, just in summary, we have a load balancer, application load balancer rather, called Lab ALB that is internet facing and uses IPv4 traffic. We've got a security group. You can have up to 5, but we just put this 1 because it's not really a production environment or anything. And we have some networking details. So we're in this default VPC in these two subnets, and we're listening for HTTP traffic over port 80, and it defaults that routing to our lab target group. So it looks good to me, so we'll go ahead and select Create Load Balancer. And it shouldn't take too long to provision here. It looks like it's already done. So we'll go ahead and click View Load Balancer. And there we have it. So now what we have done is we've set up this load balancer right here that's listening for HTTP traffic from these, users on the internet. And when it gets HTTP traffic, what it's going to do is it's going to send that traffic over here to our lab target group. And that target group contains two targets, which are two different EC2 instances. Of course, you could set up another target group to have two additional instances. Maybe this was your HTTPS traffic over here, and this is HTTP. You could maybe do that. And then, once you do that, if you really want to, go down a rabbit hole, you can set up a network load balancer to then forward requests or traffic from these two target groups out to your kind of logic tier EC2 instances, okay? But that is what we have done. And as you can see here, this lab is load balancer called Lab ALB is actually still provisioning. It takes a few minutes, so we won't necessarily sit here and wait for it. But it spans across two availability zones, so it's kind of nice that it tells you where you're working with, so you can make sure that everything is reliable by spanning and highly available rather by spanning multiple availability zones. And then, just again, from a high level overview, you can come down here, look at the details. This is an application load balancer. We've got our DNS name, that we're going to need once we actually do start accepting requests to it from our users. And then our listeners, it's just saying that, hey, for a protocol of HTTP on port 80, if that comes in, send it out to lab target group. And it's got, one rule that we can just kind of quickly review here. And that rule is, again, it's just going to kind of say whenever we receive that HTTP traffic right there, then we're going to send it or forward it rather to the target group. So rules are kind of like if-then statements. So you can even see right here, if and then. And then if you wanted to, again, specify how your traffic is actually routed, you could change kind of the priority here. And there are different kind of load balancing protocols that you can do. We talk about those in the lecture, and you can see those in the AWS documentation for load balancers as well. But yeah, that is from a high level how you set up an application load balancer. And you can see that ours is actually now active, so that really didn't take long at all. But what I'm actually going to do now, and I would recommend you doing as well, is just delete everything so that you're not paying for anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select these two instances. I'm going to say instance state. We're going to stop them both. And those will go ahead and stop. Okay, they are successfully stopping. And now I'm just going to come over here and just delete this target group because we don't need that. Yes, delete. So saying that it's currently in use by a listener or rule, so we're probably going to have to, I wonder actually if this will, let's see, I've never really deleted load balancers kind of completely, so I wonder if it'll deregister everything, our target groups and our instances. Let's see here. So we'll confirm, and okay, so it successfully deleted that, which is probably going to delete the associated rules rather. So now, if we come back here to target groups, let's close that, try it again here, and there we go. So now this will delete. I have no target groups. And then now that these are stopped, let's just go ahead and say terminate instance. And there we go. So now we're not paying for anything that we don't need. All right, so that is how you set up a application load balancer and an associated target group with targets in there, and you set up listeners and rules as well to determine how your traffic from end users is routed, from the internet ultimately to your instances hosting your application. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. As always, I'd encourage you to go read the AWS documentation. And then again, if you want, maybe try creating another target group to accept HTTPS traffic and a network load balancer to forward over to more target groups. All right. So hopefully that's helpful, and we'll see you in the next lab.